Welcome everyone to Managing Madness with Adrian.
And Carolyn.
Awesome. Thank you for joining us again. Today we'll be going into a little bit of how we actually met, but we'll be discussing our careers. But we started our careers with each other, and we thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of go into that. So
Yeah,
let's go
crazy.
back. What is it now? 18? 19
19
years?
19 years ago.
19
No,
years? 2005.
2005.
So do you want
Well,
to share how we met?
sure. Are we saying who we were affiliated with as well? That's okay.
If you'd like, yeah.
Okay. Anyways, we both actually did Teach for America, which is a program with AmeriCorps where you commit to 2 years working in an underserved community. So for me, I always knew I wanted to be a teacher, and I actually kind of had like a major breakdown the week I graduated of like, I've never considered any other career. Like, what if I don't want to be a teacher? Like, I've never even let myself think that. So I actually was one of the few people that joined Teach for America with my credential, having done student teaching already, because it's just kind of trial by fire, right? They throw you in for 6 weeks of summer school, or was it 8? I don't know. And then you're 4. Was it even that short? Stop. Okay, no, we'll stop there. So 4 weeks of summer school, and then you are clearly equipped to change the life of generations to come. So also another thing that I did is I always thought I'd be a secondary English teacher, so probably high school English teacher. But when I went to, I can't remember where the interviews were, but I checked the box that I'd be interested in teaching special education, not really realizing that like 100% meant that you would be a special education teacher. And then, of course, within like 3 minutes of talking to, I think it was like the administrator, now it's CLD here, the culturally and linguistically diverse, but at the time it was ESL, I believe. And like, yeah, they offered me a job within 30 seconds, right? Like, so super intense interview process. Not really at all. It landed in the same building. So we were, well, there was a couple others on the team also, but you and I came in the same year. There were some stories from those portables. So we shared caseloads. Like he was more the math person, I was more the English person. He was more like the big picture visionary, and I was like the details, get stuff done. What else do you want to add to that?
And see how we worked out so well. Yes, so for me, my stories, I've always had an interest in psychology. So I actually went to college for psychology and fell into a really deep depression when I graduated college and really didn't know what I was going to do. Fortunately, I had a partner at the time that took care of me very well. And she ultimately motivated me to apply for Teach for America. And I went through that process, ended up getting accepted, and ended up getting placed, yes, with you as basically my partner. Um, I wasn't sure if teaching was for me. As we go into potentially education later in another episode, I did well in school. School never was for me. Even through grad school, even though I went through grad school.
Yep.
So I never imagined myself as a teacher. That was never an ambition, but I ultimately figured,
What else am I going to do?
yeah, partly, but I'll also say it was kind of a confidence thing of where it's like, I honestly didn't feel I'd do worse than my teachers. And that
Yeah.
very arrogant to say, but none of my teachers really ever reached me. And I can say that
Right.
with 100% honesty. So I
Yeah.
figured I could potentially do a little better.
Yeah. Yeah. When the bar is so low.
Yeah. But yeah, little did I know how hard it is. And it has easily been the most difficult part of my life. I say that even to this point where, as we'll discuss, kind of the different jobs and work we've done since then, it still is, as I think back and go back, one of the hardest things. And nothing, well, not to say nothing to do with the kids. Kids were challenging. but they
Right.
weren't the
But the
difficult part.
systems,
Yes,
the people, administration, I mean, there's a lot of other,
right.
paperwork. Yeah.
That was far more difficult, right, for me to handle. It really was the kids that ended up uh, the reason why I stayed and why I ultimately
Yeah.
fell in love with the career in the community.
Mhm.
And it was very much in the students, and we'll go into this in another episode, of where I learned about my ADHD, anxiety,
Mhm.
and depression. So it wasn't,
Yeah.
I went through my entire academic career without any diagnoses. And then it wasn't until I became a special education teacher
You're
that I
like,
was
wait
like,
a second.
yes, this
Oh,
is
this
me.
feels very familiar.
This is me.
Yeah.
That is me. What is happening?
Yeah. Where and that's true. It's so kind of like I feel like we really try to emphasize just our differences and similarities. But school very much was set up for my type, right? Like I am a type A people pleaser. I love learning. I love meeting expectations. I'm really good at like cramming for a test, memorizing information, and then regurgitating it and then forgetting it. Like super helpful information. But it certainly helps with like the American education system, like that really. So then to become a special education teacher, where I mean, I am pretty neurotypical. I don't have any learning differences. I mean, I do really need to write lists. Like that's really my like major coping strategy. But
But
anyways,
learning
but
style
right,
more so
learning
than
style.
right.
But yeah, so that was super helpful for me to have you there to like explain as a student growing up, like what that experience was like for you, what you would have needed, and just trying to be able to meet kids where they were because I certainly didn't understand it. Um, but I was willing to learn and listen and grow. And I mean, I loved those those first couple. I mean, I ended up staying 3 years. Acosta went in like committed to
Right.
5, and I bailed. Um, but I stayed in extra, and like those, I mean, those students from our first couple years were in my wedding. I had one as a speaker, I had several as ushers. So they just, when I go back to my why, I go back to kids from that group,
Yeah, same. And was it in your first year, second year that you had your resignation letter already?
First. It
First
was
year.
by
Okay, yeah.
December.
So I wanted to point that out just because even
Yeah.
from the
Well,
start, careers
that's
have
a
been.
funny story too, right? Is like,
Yeah.
so by December I'd used well, I remember
And
walking with a friend of ours. What?
and for the audience, really quickly, as she's laughing, I'm also a new teacher, and she's my co-teacher. So as she's mentioning missing all this time and ready to quit, you can imagine my joy on the other end.
Yeah,
But
totally.
yes, tell your story.
Yes. So I remember before we had started and we were like walking downtown to the building in LASD to like turn in information. I was on the phone with my dad and I'm like talking about, changing the world basically. And he's like, oh, to be young and unjaded. And I was so offended. I was like, I will never become jaded. Like, there's a bigger purpose here, blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, by December, I'd used all my mental health days, all my sick days. I remember we had a mutual friend of ours that was on a track schedule. So she also substituted and she substituted for my class one time. And I got a voicemail that was like, I feel like I'm at a college kegger, but there's no keg. I just intercepted a drug deal. Because remember, the kids would know where the subs were, and everybody would show in that classroom. So there'd be like 80 students in a classroom, and it's a sub. They don't know who these kids are. Anyways, so yeah, I wrote my letter of resignation. My dad was like, "You're just a number. Like you're totally replaceable," but not really, because I mean, I think we had 15 of our 80 teachers were unfilled that whole year. But I went and met with our principal at the time, let her know, and she was like, please just stay until the semester, which at the time, I don't know if it still does, but ended in February. And in the meantime, she went on to have a massive stroke, remember? And so she was out of commission. And then I felt like I couldn't, like I felt like I couldn't leave. And here I am almost 20 years later, still in a similar career. So anyways.
Um, no, totally, and I love that was, I completely forgot that was in our first year. That we had several principals. I think I had 3 official principals in my 5 years.
You had more
Um,
than that because I had 3 in my 3 years.
there's than 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
we had people try to sit in for a bit that
Hmm.
were never like official
Never.
too.
Yeah.
But
Oh, true.
yes, so then I stayed, fell in love. I had a very dramatic exit as well, just in the sense of me being completely fed up. Really went out. So from that point, I fell in love with the community, went out into the community, tried to learn more about it, invested my savings at the time
Mm-hmm.
into ultimately learning more about the community, understanding it. Started a nonprofit, really got into that with a group of friends, failed at that, had to end up leaving that nonprofit, end up only to start another one literally the next day. Another big component, as we discussed, because it'll probably come up as challenges with school. I'm also quite defiant. So as we were discussing,
I would have never known. Tell me more.
as you mentioned earlier, just willing to please and stuff, that's never been me. I
Not
want
on your
people,
radar.
no, I want people to be happy and well around me, but
Yeah.
to be a person pleaser or to do what I'm told is just, it's never been in me. That might go with the whole ADHD, neurodivergence. It's been some discussions of oppositional defiance, but uh, who knows? Uh, but from there, I ended up, yeah, learning about the community, starting a nonprofit, and really getting into that. And what's been interesting now as I'm looking at my career, I thought that was going to be my like thing in education,
Hmm.
was going to
Hmm.
be like the nonprofit world, um, and everything. And what I want to mention about that too is, even though I haven't necessarily, like, my nonprofit hadn't grown to where I wanted to be, and still the same. Um, I've always come back to how difficult teaching was. And
Hmm.
that's where, like you say, what ultimately keeps you kind of in the game and what you keep remembering is that first group of students. My
Hmm.
entire career still is very much based off of those students that were there with
Hmm.
me in those 5 years, and just how much they taught me. And a
Oh
lot
my
of that now,
gosh. Yeah.
right, shifting on how I can utilize what they taught me, now learning ultimately my skills, because what I learned through that process is I made my career my everything. That was my life. I didn't exist really as an individual outside of my career. So, like, very much in the sense of, like, my nonprofit was my identity. If I
Hmm.
was doing
Hmm.
something, it was in the name of that and in representing that and all of that. And that's really shifted for me over time, specifically just this past couple of years, where we discussed last time, just capitalism and the idea of
Hmm.
just grinding so much. And that was one thing about it. Wasn't ever the like students, even though we mentioned like the
Hmm.
students, it was a wild setting and situation. Not the children's fault. The children are going to do what you
Hmm.
allow them to do.
Yep.
um but just all the like paperwork that you mentioned, all the logistics, all the, like, it was the consistent grinding,
Yeah.
uh which
The
just carried
minutia,
on.
as a principal friend of mine will say, just like so much stuff that bogs you down.
Right.
Yeah.
And how that seems to be, even that has just continued to be
Hmm.
the continuous story through any type of work I ultimately jump into. So it wasn't even just a teaching thing. And that's kind of going into now where I loved, like a couple years ago, the concept of quiet quitting,
Hmm.
which I found so fascinating and
Yeah. Tell me
never.
more, because I think I have an idea, but I'm not
Right.
sure either.
So quiet quitting was, I don't know, on some social media, it started ultimately as a trend. And the idea was that you worked the hours you were paid to work. You didn't bring
Yeah.
your work home. You didn't do the like extra steps. You did what you were contractually obligated to do.
Obligated to do.
And
Okay.
you did it. The goal was ultimately, it was never suggested that you do it poorly either, that you're
Right.
doing it
Right.
well. You're just doing that though.
Yeah.
Uh and
And why is that considered quiet quitting, though?
that's where it was just, that to me is exactly the reflection back to capitalism, because
Yeah.
we've
Like we're
always
quitting
tried,
because we're boundaring our time, and yeah.
which is exactly all that was just
Yeah.
people saying, like, I'm not gonna like work,
Yeah.
60-hour weeks and get paid for
Right.
40.
Yeah.
I'm no longer going to be taking these extra things. And somehow that was quiet quitting because you weren't putting it all in for the team and the company. But
That is crazy. And is that like mainly geared towards education, or was that
no,
kind of
that was
bigger?
no, that was I didn't hear it as because it's kind of hard to quiet quit in teaching.
Well, I
uh,
know I'm like, and like how unfortunate that because there is legitimately no way to get everything done within a workday, right? So
right,
even like in my career shift this year from going from an instructional coach where I really could boundary my time because there weren't kids depending on, I
right,
mean, they depended on me in a different way than like me being the one, you know, primarily teaching and learning from them. Like I just kind of more interacted and supported the teachers. But now to be in this position where I'm back to teaching, and even though it's in a different environment and I'm online and I'm working from home, even my 11-year-old daughter has made comments like, I think this job is not what you expected. You are having to work way more than I've seen because I have to lesson plan on the
yeah,
weekends. I have to grade over the evenings, like and I don't mind it, but I'm certainly not getting paid for it,
right,
but it has to be done.
right.
I don't know. Yeah,
No,
it's
and
interesting.
I mean, and that goes into more like fields that I believe are specifically like abusive of workers in the sense of that
Mm-hmm.
of abusing the fact that most teachers want to be there for their kids. They're not in the occupation for the money
Yeah, money
or
or
the ease
prestige.
or anything
Mm-hmm.
like that that people may want to
Mm-hmm.
throw on it.
Yeah.
A lot of them are into
No,
the
is
kids
it like
and
our having the summers off nice? Yes. But we don't get paid for that time. Like we're paid for the days that we work.
right.
So I mean, here we have the option, I can't remember if we did there too, where we can still have our paycheck spread out over the 12 months, but I'm not getting paid for that. It's just
hmm
split differently.
But also too with that, some teachers are in trainings, things like that. Some teachers have to work summer school for,
Hmm.
income sake and things like that. So, but no, the trend was much more just a general trend, much more in
Okay.
youth. The youth were really the
Interesting.
ones that were
Hmm.
pushing it, but that's why it was older generations that were calling it quiet quitting and that it
Which
wasn't.
is interesting, but yeah, I don't know. Well, and we have different experiences too from where we were, but like both my parents always worked. My mom was a nurse and she didn't, I mean, you couldn't bring work home, right? Like, I mean, I know there are some nurses now that like work at clinics and probably still need to do like paperwork at home, but my mom took care of that at work. And my dad, when he worked for a company, I don't know if he worked past his hours. Like when he was home, he was home. Like it. Now, when he owned his own business, that became way different with hours and commitments and hmm.
And
But he also kind of grew up in a time where he felt like the loyalty to companies and places was like way bigger, right? Like you kind of like had a career and just stuck it out, where that's just not what happens now.
what I think that's what a lot of us are learning, and I think the younger generation knows. Um, that as far even in transitioning to different jobs, that can ultimately lead to pay increases and things like that, where it's not always beneficial just to stay with a company. But
Yeah.
like you were saying, that's kind of what I always wanted. I know my dad wished I had just always stayed with the school district because that was something
Yeah.
stable, consistent, something I
Yeah.
could,
Healthcare.
right,
Yeah.
something that was going to be there. There was growth in the field. There was security in the field, and that is huge for a lot of people. I definitely recognize the privilege that I have to be able to leave that for a bit. Um,
I mean, there's whole like coaching programs now designed on like coaching teachers out of education, and like
mhm.
the skill set that teachers have. I mean, we're multitaskers, we're organized, we're big picture thinkers, but we're detail focused, we're able to stick to timeline. I mean, there are like some really big skills that come in the teaching world. Like, so the things, I mean, when I think about like what I could be doing and the amount of even, I mean, my sister and brother-in-law, and what they do, and they make, I mean, 6 times the amount of what I make. And I'm like, I've been doing this for 20 years. I have 2 master's degrees. Like, I'm pretty good at what I do, and I do not make that much money. So
And that's what I learned, I think, a lot in the nonprofit space was honestly the nonprofit space is a lot like the for-profit space,
Hmm.
um, which is
But just
very
less money.
unfortunate.
Pretty cool.
Well, no, it's not even less money. It really
Okay.
ultimately depends on how the big difference, from my understanding, and maybe people will ultimately correct me on this, but the main difference between the nonprofit and the for-profit is the for-profit company can take any surplus income and
Hmm.
distribute that however you want.
Okay.
So if you plan to make simple like just $1 million and you make
Hmm.
2 million, you can
Hmm.
have that extra million of profit spread out and give people bonuses and things like that.
Okay.
In a nonprofit, you cannot do that. That extra million needs to be reinvested into the next year.
Okay.
However,
Huh.
what
Then you can
CEOs and
redo a
executives
budget.
often do is increase your budget and just increase
Yeah.
your salary the next year.
Okay.
So you may not get $1 million bonus or something like that, but if your salary happens to increase, so ever. So that's
Right.
how and that's
Huh.
how we have nonprofits that have, millionaire CEOs and things like that, because
Right.
that's ultimately the big difference. And that's what I learned a lot in a lot of the work that I was doing, that it was a lot of the same capitalistic drive and mechanisms that would make
Hmm.
a nonprofit successful is
Yeah.
very
The
similar what
same
makes
mindset.
for-profits successful.
Yeah.
A lot of where I'd have to uh a huge reason as to why I haven't, taken on employees and things like that has the big challenge of not being able to pay them a living wage, and
Yeah.
not taking advantage of the situation, or like, oh, some money is, good enough. Of No, because understanding that those people are now dedicating time to be doing something for me in which they are not getting ultimately what they need to live in return
Hmm.
for me. And how challenging that ultimately is, especially when you discuss scaling and things like that. If you really want to
Hmm.
blow up and, do extremely well, a lot of it is approaching it in that, capitalistic way. And that
Yeah.
I've realized I can't do. I really can. And
Yeah.
it's just a big challenge where now not relearning, but learning how to try to make my work fit my morals and not
Yeah.
have these different, and I mean that's always been the case, but removing a lot of the goals and standards or benchmarks that others put on what success
Yeah,
means.
that's
And that
so hard to do when we are in this constraint of the system. I mean, I remember, yeah, the first or second year teaching when students would talk to me about, like taking over the system and creating all these different things and making things better. But I'm like, I love that and I'm here for it. And you need it all needs to happen. And you have to learn how it functions now to be able to get in a position of power, to have influence and voice, to then change things. Because I don't know. It's very convoluted and there's so much work that needs to be done. And then I just get really tired and I go buy plants.
plants are great. If I could keep them alive, I would have them around.
You should see
Um,
my jungle. There are so many plants now.
I can only imagine.
Yeah.
Um, in now that you've kind of learned of the concept of quiet quitting, how do you feel
Yeah.
about that and the whole idea of the grind? What is the grind for you like now?
Well, 20 years in, I feel like I'm more able to prioritize what can be let go, and what isn't worth my time. And it's interesting. I'm actually on a team right now with four of us, and two of them are new teachers. So within the first 3 years of their careers, so the amount of effort and energy and time and resources, their planning and their lessons and their grading, it's I just don't have that time to give. In addition to my job, my priority is my home, right? I'm raising kids. I want peace for myself. I want to hang out with friends. I want to hike. I want to treat my body well. There's just things that I can see now that were not worth my time. How many nights and weekends were we still at work, right? I before kids and being married, I was easily working I mean, well, in Dallas, even up to like 14 hours a day because I was also coaching and traveling and, um, but as soon as I got pregnant with my now 11-year-old, it kind of was like this big realization of like, what am I wanting to model? Like, so I'm going to tell my kids that like work is more important, and even if you don't have kids, so you're going to tell yourself that work is more important, or like, I don't know. Just it is really easy to get lost in, especially with something like education or healthcare, or where there is like so much purpose behind it and passion, and like it does fill me up. Like maybe not as much in the online environment, but there are moments like I still have like these glimmers of like this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. Like there's growth and it's like tangible and anyways, it makes me really sad that people would consider that quiet quitting to like boundary their own time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
But it does to me, honestly, because I even think about that even in the nonprofit space of, an upstart and what it means to be kind of an
mhm.
upstart. A lot of the culture around an upstart is the idea that you're working
Grind. Like,
over,
yeah.
yeah, is that whole grind. You're putting
Yeah.
in those extra hours because,
Yeah.
but it's like,
Get people to, yeah, budget or what do they like support you or
right.
yeah, it's a
But
lot.
the big question of what I'm realizing, when does that stop?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't just stop at when a company's an upstart. It
Right.
continues going because then you have your seasons and your different benchmarks for different time frames and different things like that.
Yeah.
And that's where it's interesting as that concept comes into play. And one of the big things for me where I think why I really appreciate the youth, because I think they're moving more towards this idea that work doesn't necessarily just have to be um a terrible thing that you do from 9 to 5,
hmm
and that leeches
Yeah.
away all
Like
your energy.
yeah. And I don't want my kids, students, or biological and other children to think that yeah, like you grow up and this sucks. Like no, I want to model like yeah, there's a lot more responsibility, and we talked about that last time too. Like I wish there weren't, but I mean it's just kind of where we are. But it's also fun. Like I do have some freedom in like who I choose to hang out with and what I choose to spend my time doing. And I want my kids to look forward to that, not be like, oh, here goes mom again. Like she's so overwhelmed. And, so I think especially these last couple months of my life, as so much has been transitioning, my kids really have noticed that, like, you just seem so happy. And I was like, I am. Like, this is fun. Like, I maybe made some choices that drained me for too long. But yeah, just what do we want the youth of today to be like experiencing, looking forward to? And yeah, I don't know.
Because a lot of it is that want I don't want the youth to get to kind of my age and get to kind of a point where I'm like, yeah, this isn't it. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and then have
Mm-hmm.
to really, with the idea of now that I'm ultimately struggling with or trying to balance of what does life look like? What does, if I don't, prescribe to all these concepts laid out for me, what does
Mm-hmm.
my specific life look like? What does my specific career look like? What does,
Yeah.
success and all of that actually look like? And trying to redefine what that does mean for me, because I do think that's what I'm kind of learning from the younger generations, is that's what they seem to be wanting to do for
Mm-hmm.
themselves. And I think having older generations model that for them, kind of go through some of those
Yeah.
journeys, so that they can hopefully learn from some of our journeys, I think will be very beneficial.
Yeah. I even had my 11-year-old the other night was like, what would be your dream job? And I was like, I mean, I never, because like I said, I never really let myself think of anything outside of education. And I was like, I mean, independent wealth would be really nice. But like, what would I mean, I would like more flexibility in my time. I would but then I think, like I have my type D license to be in administration. So that was kind of the thought, is that that would be like the natural next step. I got it several years ago. I mean, I was on maternity leave with my 8-year-old, and then kind of had this realization of like, so I'm going to go like get more responsibility and more time away from my house. And I've got 3 little kids. Like, no. So I thought maybe like even next year would be the time for that. But I don't think it is. Like, I like working from home. I like the freedom that that affords me, still within like this construct. Yeah, so I don't really know what my dream job would be. And I like that it feel like at the end of the day, most of the time, I feel like I'm making a difference in a positive way. Like, would I find that somewhere else, even if I made more money? Problem is, I like traveling. I like nice things. I spend a lot of money, so I need more money. But then I hate that. I'm like, why? Like, yeah, a friend of mine who they're a counselor for trans youth, and one of their clients was saying this just all seems crazy. Like, money is this made up construct that we're like functioning. Like, are we in the twilight zone? Like, and they're like, yeah, you're not crazy. Like, this
Right,
is
yeah.
all kind of weird.
Hmm.
So I don't know. What would be your dream job?
I think I'm trying to create it,
Yeah.
honestly, and I think that's where I'm really trying to move towards, where really understanding what I want from life, what I want from my career, and
Hmm.
also understanding that I'm capable of creating that, and really trying to understand what working with my values, but more important, working with community, how that ultimately looks and how that can be more sustainable and scalable
Hmm.
without necessarily like exploitation, with much more like
Right.
cooperation. So that's why I'm really trying to, I think, create what my
Yeah.
dream job, because I don't think any other job I see really exists out there.
Yeah. I mean,
Um,
can I get paid to like read books and take naps? Is that
I'm sure
snap?
you could in some, not paid well, or not paid
Yeah.
sustainable, but that is kind of where it goes into, because one of the things where, like you've discussed, you like nice things, you like traveling. One of my big issues and why I don't even have like the passport is I struggle with the concept of traveling, and it's in a song. I wish I knew the rapper who actually said it, but he says, "I wish my mind came with a kill switch. I don't vacation,
Mhm.
dog. I guilt trip."
Yeah.
Because that's how I am. Because it's hard for me to plan things of
Where you know
luxury or
you're going to be spending
privilege.
money on yourself.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I get that.
and where a lot of my travels before, I always loved seeing um the quote unquote riskier neighborhoods
Yeah.
in communities that I'd go to, because I grew up in
Yeah.
the quote unquote riskier neighborhood of
Hmm.
LA.
Yeah.
Uh,
But what's interesting is I'm really drawn to that too, even in my travels. And this is where my height really does. Like, this has come up before, I am 6'3". So my experience while traveling, I mean, I've traveled the world by myself, and I would like happily continue to do so. And I have so many friends that are more like, but they're little. They don't get it. I'm like, my friend the other day was like, a bullet would still kill you. And I'm like, oh, okay, then take me out. Because that's definitely what and I'm not like totally unwise. Like, I'm aware of my surroundings. And it just doesn't like, I'm not, I'm not a target. I'm taller than most men. So, but it opens up the opportunities of what I feel comfortable doing, and interacting with. So, yeah.
with all that in mind, because I do think it's an important topic for a lot of people our age, what do you think of retirement?
Be done working for an education system. But I mean, really, I'd like it by 50, but I think realistically by 55. And then I want that to like open up opportunities to do things that I want. Like, I want to go in and volunteer at schools. I want to go in, or maybe even here they have a lot of positions for like the part-time interventionist. So you just work several hours a day with small groups of kids. That's super appealing to me. Um, I don't know. I mean, can you ever really fully retire? Especially with
Well,
some, I don't,
that's what I was actually going to point out,
yeah,
because it sounds like your retirement is to retire from full
to
time
work.
work to a little
Yes,
less work, not
yes,
actually
yes.
the concept of what retire. But I do think that's kind of where a lot of people our age are, because you said at 55,
Yeah,
that's
less than
14
15
years
years. Yeah,
away, 13 years.
13. Yeah.
Um, but I do think that's kind of a position a lot of us are in, or what that
Hmm.
ultimately looks like. And that's why for me, I don't foresee retirement the way
Hmm.
my parents got to
Yeah.
experience the idea of
Yeah.
retirement, or even some of
But
my
was it, but you know what? I mean, my parents really ran into kind of a lot of depression in retirement of like, what is my purpose? Like, what am I doing? And finally, like my dad's counselor urged him, like, you need to find something you're passionate about and go do it. And so my dad started doing a lot of volunteer work. He like worked at the airport as like the little information guy. And then he went and worked at a nonprofit downtown in Phoenix, working with a lot of former felons, just helping them work on their resumes and interview skills. And, it was so cute the amount of feedback he would get, because he'd get all the information of like their employment history and then, create the resume for them. And some people would read it and just start tearing up of like, this is what I've done. My dad's like, yeah, there's a way to like word it, like wordsmith, like the impact that you've had and what you have to offer. But anyways, that really gave him purpose, where my mom is super involved in her community, and does a lot of volunteer work within Al-Anon. And, but yeah, like, cause when you just kind of sit, I think it's nice to think about all this extra time and limited responsibility. But I think human nature too is a majority of us are driven by like improvement and bettering of others and bettering of ourselves. No, it's, a very big overgeneralization, but for the most part, I think people are good, and want to do good things. And those that aren't are just really loud, and they are really loud, dominate a lot of things. It's like, even like working in an inner city school, like, 98% of those students were absolutely incredible, and the 2% were really loud. But you could also under like behaviors communication, right? So we knew they were communicating in ways that didn't serve them well. But there were needs. There were needs
well,
that,
and for me, my concept, and that's why I can't even um say like 2% were like challenging, because to me those are probably just the 2% that were going through the most. And
yeah,
understanding now
absolutely.
just that like kids are literally incapable of
Yeah.
fully developing
But
cognitive uh
yeah, as teenagers, like, come on. I've got like one preteen and a teen in the house, and it is like crazy town around here. But think about when we worked there, how many teachers were assaulted or hospitalized. And like, never could I ever imagine a student having put a hand on us.
hmm.
Like and
Well, I did
I
well.
mean, I, well,
Did I ever tell you?
that was a unique situation.
Well,
um,
I yes, we'll share
yeah.
stories.
Yeah. We've got some
But it
stories
was
like that.
it was always my on both situations where
You
both
were
of them
getting
were
involved in a way that most teachers would not have even
that
stepped
was another
in.
thing. I often would step into
Yeah.
situations that
Yeah.
I was
Where
advised
they
not
were,
to.
the response wasn't towards you. It was they were already in this place of like not seeing straight.
Right.
But how many, like, I would leave my wallet out, my keys out. My kids would be
Oh
like,
yeah.
Miss, I still do the same stuff. I leave my keys in the car. It's like this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all that to say, who knows if I'll ever retire?
Yeah. Same. And I think that's part of why I think I've started to transition into trying to create my
what feels sustainable too, like,
right,
and
exactly.
purposeful and energizing. I like that.
What can I do to continue um, both being productive but also feeling a sense of fulfillment and not
Hmm.
just drained from the work
Yeah.
I do.
Yep. I
But
get that. Well, excited to see how it all develops.
yes, and now we introduced a whole new element um, of kind of work here,
Yeah.
which would be interesting as this develops.
Yeah.
Yes. So
Exciting.
thank thank you all if you've stuck with us. Again, this episode airs, we'll have another one filmed and ready to go. So thank you all. Yes. Hopefully we'll see you again. I wish you all peace, love, and power.
Yes. Bye, guys.